Hi, I'm Jeremy, I'm a writer, and this is my YouTube channel where I make videos about all things imaginary. This video is another in the series I make called Experience Gain, where I talk about how to get the most out of your home Dungeons & Dragons games. In this episode, we're going to be talking about dual wielding. I think dual wielding is such a cool, evocative way for a character to engage in combat, but it can seem a little bit complicated to get into if you're considering making a character who dual wields. So I want to break down how dual wielding works and give you some interesting ideas of how you might bring it into your games. The first and most important thing to know is that every character can dual wield, but not every character can dual wield effectively. I want to start by talking about the general rules around dual wielding before getting into any of the specifics about how feats and other features interact with it for your specific characters. Now, one of the first things that you have to know is that in D&D, dual wielding is actually called two-weapon fighting. And the rule block on it goes like this. When you take the attack action and attack with a light melee weapon that you're holding in one hand, you can use a bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon that you're holding in the other hand. You don't add your ability modifier to the damage of the bonus attack unless that modifier is negative. If either weapon has the thrown property, you can throw the weapon instead of making a melee attack with it. So let's start by breaking this down. First, you have the point about light melee weapons. Light is a special quality that certain weapons have. Not all weapons do, obviously. Some are heavy or some are thrown. Those are all different features and qualities that weapons can have in D&D. In simple weapons, you have the dagger, hand axe, and light hammer, which all have both the light and thrown weapon properties. You then also have the club and sickle, which only have the light weapon property. Amongst the martial weapons, the only weapons that have the light property are the scimitar and short sword. These are the weapons you have to choose from if you have no other features interacting with your ability to dual wield. If you want to use this two-weapon fighting, you need to be using light weapons from the list that I just stated. Other things that are important to remember is that you need to have a light weapon in both hands, not just in one of your hands. But they don't need to be the same kind of light weapon. You can have a scimitar in one hand and a short sword in another, or a simple light weapon in one hand and a martial light weapon in the other. And of course, you've got to remember that you don't get that ability modifier that you typically add to your damage on your second weapon, because you're still not as fluent, not as capable with using a second weapon in combat. Also, regardless of how many attacks you get when you take the attack action, you only get one extra attack when you use your secondary weapon with a bonus action to attack. And each weapon that you carry must be drawn or stoned individually if your game gets that granular. So those are the very basic two-weapon fighting rules that you'll be subject to unless you have any other features that interact with them and tell you otherwise to contradict those rules or add new elements onto them. These are the benefits that you get from the dual wielder feat. First, you get a +1 bonus to your armor class while you're wielding a separate melee weapon in each of your hands. Second, you can use two-weapon fighting even when the one-handed weapons you're wielding are not light. And third, you can draw or stow two one-handed weapons when you would normally be able to draw or stow only one. The real advantages here with this feat are that it makes you a little bit tougher and it allows you to use weapons that aren't light in your fighting. All of a sudden you have a much wider range of weaponry available to you, and weapons that deal higher damage now are a core part of your arsenal. It is important to note, however, that it makes no change to whether or not you can add your ability modifier to your secondary attack. Unfortunately, the dual wielder feat does require you giving up a feat in order to use it, which makes it a bit of an expensive purchase, and a lot of people feel that it would be better included within the capabilities of two-weapon fighting right from the start. It's up to you how you feel about balancing that in your own games, but I don't think it's that bad of an idea, and it's definitely something that I would toy around with if any of my players are ever interested in dual wielding. The other feature that players interested in dual wielding will almost always get, depending on their class, is the two-weapon fighting style. Fighting styles are features available to certain classes that make a character more effective while wielding certain kinds of armor or certain arrangements of weapons. In this case, the two-weapon fighting style happens to make you better with dual wielding, but other fighting styles can improve your ability with a shield or just wearing armor or with two-handed weapons, for example. The two-weapon fighting style is available to both the ranger and the fighter, and even though the paladin has fighting styles, it does not get access to two-weapon fighting as an option. Here is the simple text of what this fighting style does. When you engage in two-weapon fighting, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of the second attack. So that's it. That's all that the fighting style does, but it allows you now to have that ability modifier on your second attack, and all of a sudden you're as good with your secondary weapon as you are with your first. It might seem a little underwhelming for fighting styles, but fighting styles are really a fighter class-centric feature that are just meant to give a small and specific boost to characters to reward them for specializing in a certain style of fighting. As far as the book goes, those are really the most important things to know about dual wielding and setting up a dual wielding, two-weapon fighting character, but I do have some other thoughts on dual wielding to offer for you to consider for your own games at home, whether you're a player or a DM. First, the rules never designate any sort of main hand, obviously, so it's up to you to decide which weapon and which hand you're using as your main weapon and which is your secondary. The only thing the rules do say is that your bonus attack must be done with a different weapon than the one used in your attack action. So realistically, if you're proficient with both of the weapons that you're using, as you should be, you can really switch from combat to combat which one is in your main hand if you want to switch up your damage type. If you have a club in one hand and a dagger in the other, which would be a really bad setup, but would work, you have two different damage types, and you might want to have bludgeoning in your main hand for one combat, or slashing in your main hand for the other one. Or dagger slashing? I think they might be piercing. Ugh, I really should know that off the top of my head. Daggers are piercing. I guess a short sword would have been the better example, as that's what I was thinking about. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is that because the rules are stated this way, it assumes that during your attack action, you're making all of your attacks with only one of the weapons that you're holding. Personally, I don't have and wouldn't have any problem hand-waving away this part of the rule, and I don't think you should either. It doesn't stop characters from playing in the spirit of the game, and I think it does little to break the balance. Instead, if a character happens to have 3 attacks, allow them to decide which weapons they want to use. They'll still be penalized according to using a secondary weapon, their second hand, if they don't have the fighting style features they need, but this way they can feel more like a dual-wielding fighter that's swinging with both hands and not just repeatedly with one before getting a small stab at the end. Then again, not every player might want that, so it's up to you to discuss with your DM, or for you as a DM to bring it up to your player to give them the option. In the case that I mentioned before with bludgeoning in one hand and slashing in the other, it gives the dual-wielding player or character another kind of small advantage to compensate for the fact that most people think dual-wielding's a little bit underpowered, and by the hard numbers, it doesn't end up doing as much damage as most of the other fighting styles, or at least not the main two-handed weapon fighting style. I think in this case, having the versatility of being able to switch between types of weapon damage if you have 2 different kinds of weapons in your hand, like the club and short sword that I mentioned, is a cool additional piece of flavor and, I guess, mechanical opportunity that you're giving to a player for them to think about and utilize and feel more like their character is getting to do something cool in every round of combat. There are a few reasons people don't like two-weapon fighting because, for example, they feel it's underpowered compared to two-handed weapon fighting. If you're looking at it from a pure numbers point of view, that is true and that can be a reason not to go with it, but I think you should really be instead considering what fits for your character and what gives your character the kind of look and feel that you want to have in-game. Just because a halberd is a stronger weapon doesn't necessarily mean that your character should wield a halberd if you think they look cooler or seem more right with the story and image you had in mind wielding 2 short swords. The one main drawback really mechanically is that using that secondary weapon attack uses a bonus action, which a lot of other class features that you might get as your character progresses actually competes with. The trade-off is that you do get that one extra attack whenever you have the opportunity for it and don't need to use your bonus action for something else. If you want to make this dual wielding and two-weapon fighting stronger in your game, that's your prerogative, but that's my take and my thoughts on the two-weapon fighting and dual wielding in D&D. I hope this helps you figure out how to use dual wielding and how it actually could work in your games and for your characters. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to subscribe. I make new nerdy videos every Friday. Most of the time they're about D&D, but occasionally I talk about creativity and other imaginary topics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.